Any father would be dead worried if he hasn't seen his child for a good 4 days for no reason. Just 4 days earlier, Clint Dunn's 13-year-old daughter vanished without a trace. He hasn't slept. He's been searching everywhere, parks, walking alleys, calling anyone who might know something. Across the street, music is playing. People are laughing, and there's a party ongoing in the same house where his daughter disappeared from. At the center of it all is a man who claims he saw her just hours before she vanished. But there's a problem. Phone records say that's impossible. Now there's a lot of questions. If this man wasn't there when he said he was, then where was he? And more importantly, where is his 13-year-old daughter? And what really happened inside that house? This is the sad story of 13-year-old Haley Dunn, a bright, active teenager who disappeared from her own home in a quiet Texas town. Please subscribe to our channel. We share the best of true crime stories. So at first, police thought she might have run away, but almost immediately, things didn't add up. Timelines didn't match, stories started changing, and the one person who should have been helping was doing the opposite. It would take over a decade before an arrest was finally made. But even now, one question still lingers over this case. Was the truth always there, and nobody was just looking at it? In cases like this, the most unsettling part is often how ordinary everything seems at the beginning. There are no warning signs, no chaos, no sense that anything is about to go wrong. Just a normal day starting like any other. In late December of 2010, 13-year-old Haley Dunn was living in the quiet town of Colorado City. It was the kind of place where people knew each other, where routines mattered, where nothing ever really seemed out of place. And Haley herself was very much part of that rhythm. She was active, outgoing, and full of energy. The kind of kid who filled her days without much effort. Sports, school, friends, she balanced all of it. She played multiple sports, performed in a band, and stayed involved in school life. People described her as someone who spoke her mind, joked easily, and didn't hold back her personality. But more than anything, there was one routine that stood out. Every day she went to see her dad. Her parents had separated years earlier, and Haley lived with her mother. But her father, Clint Dunn, was still a constant in her life, literally just across the street. Sometimes she'd stop by before school, other times in the afternoon, sometimes just for a few minutes. It wasn't planned. It was just what she did. It was normal. The day before she disappeared, December 26th, was no different in that sense. Haley spent most of her time with her dad. Christmas had just passed, and like most kids her age, she was still riding that excitement. New gifts, new things to try out. One of them, a brand new iPod, stood out. It was something she was especially excited about. There was no tension, no sign of distress, nothing to suggest anything was wrong. At night, she went back home. Her older brother was away, staying with a friend. Inside the house, things were quiet. So Haley stayed up playing video games, passing time the way a lot of teenagers do when they don't have school the next day. It was uneventful, ordinary. The kind of night no one remembers, until it becomes the last one. The next morning, December 27th, began early, but not for Haley. Around 5:30 a.m., her mother's boyfriend, Shaw Atkins, left the house for work. It was routine, nothing unusual about it. About an hour later, Haley's mother, Billie Jean Dunn, got ready to leave for her shift. Before walking out the door, she did something simple. She checked on her daughter. Haley was still in bed, asleep. Everything looked exactly as it should. No signs of disturbance, no reason to worry. Just a teenager sleeping in. Billie left for work, expecting the day to unfold like it always did. Haley would wake up later, spend some time at home, and at some point, walk across the street to her dad's house. Outside, nothing had changed. The same quiet street, the same short distance between two homes, one where Haley lived and one where she was expected to go. That morning, there was no panic, No indication that anything was wrong, just a normal routine, unfolding step by step, until, at some point, that routine quietly broke. Something happened, and no one noticed it right away. Now, the question that needs an answer is this: if everything started out so normal, how can someone know when a normal day begins to fall apart? So, at first, nothing about that day raised an immediate alarm. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses reporting anything unusual, no loud disturbances, just silence. And then, slowly, small details began to surface. Sometime around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a message was sent from the phone inside the house. It was simple. "What are you doing?" It was sent to one of Haley's friends. There was nothing urgent about it, nothing alarming, just a casual message, like the kind teenagers send every day. But there was one detail that would later stand out. The message was never answered, and more importantly, no one could confirm who actually sent it. Across the street, Haley's father, Clint Dunn, was waiting. He didn't think much of it at first. Haley didn't always come at the exact same time. Sometimes she showed up later in the day, so sometimes she stayed longer at home before walking over. But as the hours passed, something started to feel off, because this wasn't just a habit. It was a routine, and Haley almost never broke it. Later that afternoon, a new version of events began to take shape. According to Shaw Atkins, he had returned home at around 3 p.m. He said that when he got there, Haley was inside the house, alive, safe, completely normal. He claimed that about 15 minutes later, around 3:15, she told him she was heading over to her father's place and possibly spending the night with a friend. Then, according to him, she walked out the door. If that were true, it would have explained everything. But almost immediately, that version of events started to unravel, because no one else saw Haley leave. Not her father, not her friend, not anyone in the neighborhood. Yet then came the moment that made things even harder to ignore. Around 4 p.m., Haley's older brother, David Dunn, returned home. When he got there, the house was locked. He knocked, waited, nothing. No answer from inside. Eventually, he had to climb through a window just to get in. And when he did, he wasn't alone. Standing inside the house was Shaw. According to David, he looked confused, caught off guard, like he didn't expect anyone to be there. That detail alone didn't prove anything, but it added friction to this story. Because now there were two things that didn't quite line up. Haley was supposedly gone, but someone was still inside the house. That evening, when Billie Jean Dunn returned home from work, she immediately noticed Haley wasn't there. When she asked what happened, she was given the same explanation. Haley had gone to her father's house, and from there, she planned to stay the night with a friend. At first, it sounded reasonable, until it wasn't, because when Clint checked, Haley had never come over. And when they contacted the friend she was supposedly staying with, she had never shown up there either. At that point, everything took a pause. There was no confirmed sighting, no verified destination, no one who could place Haley anywhere after that morning. And that's when the timeline, something that should have been simple, started to collapse, piece by piece. A message no one could explain, a routine that was suddenly broken, a sighting that couldn't be confirmed, and a story that didn't quite hold together. If Haley never left for her father's house, then where did she go? By the next day, the silence had turned into something harder to ignore. Haley hadn't come home, she hadn't called, she hadn't shown up anywhere she was supposed to be. And now, there was no simple explanation left. On December 28th, a missing person report was finally filed for Haley Dunn. At first, investigators approached it the way many cases like this begin. They considered the possibility that she had run away. It's a common assumption, especially in the early hours of a disappearance. Teenagers leave, they come back. Sometimes, it's nothing more than a temporary decision. But this case didn't fit that pattern. Not even close. Haley was 13. That alone raised concern. But more importantly, nothing about her behavior or her environment suggested she had planned to leave. When investigators looked inside her room, and everything was still there, her clothes, her belongings, the everyday items someone would normally take, even for a short overnight stay, untouched. There was no packed bag, no missing essentials, no sign of preparation. And then there was the lack of communication, no calls, no messages, no activity at all. For someone as active and connected as Haley, that absence started to feel unnatural. Very quickly, the classification began to shift. This wasn't just a missing teen. This was a missing child. As that realization set in, the response changed. The community began to mobilize. People came out in groups, neighbors, volunteers, anyone willing to help. Search efforts spread across the town, streets, open areas, nearby locations, everything was checked. Flyers started going up. Word spread fast. In a town like Colorado City, news like this doesn't stay quiet for long. But while the community organized itself, one person couldn't sit still. Haley's father, Clint Dunn, didn't wait for instructions or formal search patterns. He went out on his own. He checked dumpsters, walked through alleys, covered areas most people wouldn't think to look, places no parent ever wants to imagine searching, because by that point, the possibility that something was wrong was no longer abstract. At the same time, something else was beginning to take shape. It wasn't loud, it wasn't official, but people were starting to notice things, small details, gaps in behavior, things that didn't quite match the urgency of the situation, the kind of details that don't stand out at first, but become harder to ignore the longer they sit there. And as the search continued, so one reality became clear. This wasn't a case of someone leaving. This was a case of someone disappearing, and the suspicions were becoming scary. As the days passed, the search for Haley Dunn only grew larger. More volunteers showed up, more areas were covered, more people stepped in, doing whatever they could to help. Because in a small town, when something like this happens, people don't wait to be asked. They just show up. But as that effort grew, so did a quiet observation. There was someone missing from it. Shaw Atkins, the last person who claimed to see Haley, was nowhere to be found in those search efforts. He wasn't out with volunteers. He wasn't handing out flyers. He wasn't knocking on doors or speaking to neighbors. And he wasn't standing beside the family looking for answers. At first, it wasn't something people said out loud. Everyone reacts differently to stress. Some people shut down, some people avoid crowds. Some people don't know how to process a situation like this, but the longer it went on, the harder it became to ignore. Investigators also began noticing the same pattern. His cooperation was minimal. He answered questions, but didn't go out of his way to help. He wasn't actively assisting in the search, and he wasn't inserting himself into the process the way others were. Meanwhile, across town, the search continued, and Haley's father, Clint Dunn, was still out there every day, looking, waiting, hoping for anything. Then came December 31st, 4 days after Haley disappeared. Inside the house where she was last seen, something unexpected was happening. There was a New Year's Eve gathering, music, people, dancing, a celebration. Outside, just across the street, Clint stood on his porch, watching. As a father, what would you have done? And he could not celebrate, he could not rest. From where he stood, he could see the house clearly, lights on, people inside, life continuing, while his daughter was still missing. That contrast didn't sit right with people, not just with Clint, but with others who had been following the case. Because by that point, the situation had already shifted. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't any fight. A 13-year-old girl was gone, and yet, inside that house, it didn't look like an emergency. It looked like something else entirely. That moment changed how people saw things, not officially, not in any report, but in perception. Because behavior, especially in moments like this, becomes part of the story. What people do, what they don't do, where they are and where they aren't. And as the days went on, and that absence at the very center of the case became harder to explain. Was this behavior just unusual? Or was it the first sign something deeper was being hidden? Up to this point, everything rested on people's words. What they said happened, what they claimed to have seen, and what they believed to be true. But eventually, in cases like this, something else steps in, something that doesn't rely on memory or emotion or interpretation. Data. From the beginning, Shaw Atkins had maintained a simple version of events. He said that on the morning of December 27th, he went to work as usual, arrived around 6 a.m., got into an argument with his boss, and quit on the spot. From there, he claimed he left town, driving to his mother's house in Big Spring, before eventually returning later that afternoon. It sounded straightforward, clean, almost too clean. So investigators did what they always do. They checked. When they spoke to his employer, the first crack appeared. Yes, he had shown up that morning. But the timeline didn't match what he described. According to the supervisor, Shaw arrived, bought a drink, turned in his uniform, and left. All within minutes. There was no prolonged argument, no extended stay, just a brief appearance. And then he was gone. On its own, that might not have meant much. People misremember things, they simplify stories. But then came the data. Cell tower records began mapping his movements that day, quietly, precisely. And what they showed didn't match his story at all. Instead of heading directly out of town, his phone connected to towers in Colorado City shortly after he claimed to have left the area. That meant he was still nearby, closer than he said he was. Then came the most critical part, the window of time where he claimed to be back home, and the moment he said he saw Haley around 3:15 in the afternoon. According to the data, he wasn't there. His phone placed him miles away, too far to have made the drive in time, not just unlikely, physically impossible. And just like that, that timeline broke completely. Because now, investigators weren't dealing with a misunderstanding. They were dealing with a contradiction, a clear one. He said he was there. The data said he wasn't. And when a timeline becomes impossible, everything built on top of it starts to collapse. Every statement, every detail, every explanation. From that point forward, the focus began to shift. Not publicly, not all at once. But internally, investigators started looking more closely, more carefully, at one person. Because this wasn't just about where someone was. It was about why they said something that couldn't be true. If his story wasn't true, why was he lying about something so critical? By this point, the investigation had started to shift, not just because of timelines or data, but because of something harder to measure: behavior, history, and the things people only speak about after something goes wrong. As investigators and reporters began looking deeper into Haley's life, a different picture started to emerge, one that hadn't been obvious on the surface. People close to Haley Dunn began sharing something consistent. She didn't trust Shaw Atkins. In fact, according to multiple accounts, she was afraid of him. Friends said she didn't like being around him. Family members recalled conversations where Haley made it clear she felt uncomfortable in her own home. Not always openly, but enough that it stood out. There were moments she didn't want to be there. Times she chose to stay elsewhere if she could. And gradually, those moments started to form a pattern. One detail in particular stayed with people. Haley had told her grandmother that at night she would sometimes see a shadow outside her bedroom door. Not moving, not knocking, just there, standing. It wasn't something she could explain, but it was something she remembered, and something that made her uneasy. At the time, it may have sounded like a small thing, the kind of detail that gets brushed off. But in hindsight, it felt different. And it wasn't just Haley's perspective. The environment inside the home had already drawn attention before she disappeared. Months earlier, police had been called to the house. There had been a domestic dispute between Billy and Shaw. Both of them had contacted authorities, both accusing the other. When officers arrived, the situation was tense. Arguments, aggression, instability. It wasn't an isolated incident either. According to reports, their relationship had a pattern. Arguments followed by reconciliation, conflict that was never fully resolved. And layered on top of that, there were growing concerns about what life inside the house was actually like. Mentions of alcohol, parties, an atmosphere that didn't always feel stable for two children living there. None of this proved anything on its own, but taken together, it started to form context, because when something happens without witnesses, investigators look at what came before, the patterns, the warnings, the things that didn't seem urgent at the time. And in this case, there were signs, not loud ones, but consistent ones. A child who felt uneasy, a household with conflict, a relationship that drew police attention, in the kind of details that, on their own, might not raise alarms, but together become harder to ignore. If those warning signs were already there, why did no one realize how serious they really were? Especially Clint Dunn. By now, suspicion wasn't just based on behavior. It was starting to take shape through evidence. And as investigators turned their attention inward, toward the home itself, what they found raised even more questions. Inside the house, where Haley Dunn had last been seen, the environment told a different story than what had been presented on the outside. It wasn't just a place where a girl had gone missing. It was a place with its own set of problems. Financial records were one of the first clues. Investigators traced activity from the day Haley disappeared and noticed something unusual. Money had been withdrawn shortly after. At first, it was explained as routine, gas, groceries, everyday expenses. But that explanation didn't hold. Because later, it was determined that the money had actually been used to purchase drugs. The detail alone shifted the tone. Because now, the timeline of that day included not just a disappearance, but drug activity. As the investigation continued, authorities took a closer look at the home itself. And that's when things escalated. During a search of the property, investigators came across something unexpected: stacks of printed materials, hundreds of pages, all focused on violent crimes, serial killings, sexual sadism, murders involving family members. It wasn't illegal on its own, but it was disturbing. And in the context of a missing child case, it added another layer of concern. Then came the most serious discovery: digital evidence. On devices connected to the household, investigators uncovered a massive collection of illegal images, over 100,000 in total. Material involving child exploitation. That finding changed everything. Because now, the investigation wasn't just about inconsistencies or suspicious behavior. It was tied to something far more serious, something that pointed toward intent. At this stage, Shaw Atkins was officially named a person of interest, not publicly declared guilty, but no longer on the sidelines of the investigation, and the consequences inside the home followed quickly. Authorities made the decision to remove Haley's brother from the house for his safety, because whatever was happening there, it was no longer considered stable. Then, another shift. When investigators returned to the house looking for Shaw, they were told he wasn't there. But that wasn't true. He was inside, hiding. That moment led to the arrest of Billie Jean Dunn, not for the disappearance itself, but for lying to police about his whereabouts. By this point, the situation had changed completely. What began as a missing person case had turned into something darker, more complicated, more difficult to explain, because now there were multiple layers. A missing child, a broken timeline, a home tied to drugs, disturbing materials, illegal digital evidence, and a key figure who wasn't being truthful, all of it pointing in one direction. But still, not enough to make an arrest for Haley. And that's what made it even more unsettling. With so much suspicion building, why was no one arrested? After everything that had surfaced, the contradictions, the behavior, the evidence inside the home, you might expect the case to move quickly toward answers, but it didn't. Instead, it slowed. As weeks turned into months, the urgency that once defined the search began to fade. Not because people stopped caring, but because there was nothing new to follow. No confirmed sightings, no clear direction, no breakthrough. Search efforts continued, but they became harder to sustain. Weather conditions forced pauses, volunteers came and went, leads dried up. And gradually, the case entered a phase that many investigations never recover from: silence. Still, the story didn't disappear. It reached beyond the town. National attention grew. Media coverage brought more eyes to the case, more awareness, more questions. But sadly, no answers. But then, behind the scenes, investigators kept working, reviewing evidence, revisiting timelines, following up on tips. But each path led back to the same place: uncertainty. Then, more than 2 years after Haley vanished, something changed. In March of 2013, in a remote area of Scurry County, a hiker made a discovery: human remains. The location was isolated, far from the center of town, a place you wouldn't come across by accident unless you were looking, or unless you just happened to be there. The remains were recovered and sent for analysis. For weeks, there was no confirmation, just waiting. Then, on April 26, 2013, the results came back. The remains belonged to Haley Dunn. After more than 2 years of searching, the outcome everyone feared was now confirmed, but even then, some questions remained unanswered. The exact cause of death was never officially released. Though it was believed to involve blunt force trauma, there was no public confirmation that fully explained what had happened. And with that, the case entered another difficult phase. Because finding Haley didn't mean solving the case. There was still no arrest, no formal charges, no clear explanation of how she ended up there. For her family, the timeline didn't end with discovery. It stretched even further. Years passed before they were finally able to lay her to rest, waiting for answers, waiting for justice, waiting for something that never seemed to come. And for investigators, the challenge remained the same. They knew where she had been found, but they still couldn't prove who put her there. The case didn't close. It didn't resolve. It just stopped moving. The issue now was, investigators now knew where she was found. What still prevented them from naming who put her there? For a long time, it felt like the case had reached its limit. The evidence had been reviewed. The search had been exhausted. And even after Haley was found, there were still no answers that could hold up in court. But while the investigation slowed down, one person never did. Clint Dunn refused to let the case fade. Year after year, he kept talking about Haley, posting online, sharing updates, asking questions that still hadn't been answered. He wasn't just grieving, he was pushing. Because in cases like this, time can work against the truth. Memories fade, attention moves on, and without pressure, cases can quietly disappear. But this one didn't. Nearly a decade after Haley went missing, something unexpected happened. An anonymous person came forward. Now, back in 2011, just months after Haley disappeared, this person had found several items. At the time, they didn't think much of it. They were young, they didn't know about the case, and there was nothing that clearly connected those items to anything serious. So they never reported it. Years passed. Life moved on. Until one day in 2019, they saw something. a post shared online by Clint, talking about Haley asking for help. And suddenly, that memory came back. What once seemed insignificant now felt important. The person reached out, and for the first time, investigators were given a new piece of information tied to something found years earlier. Details about the items and exactly where they were discovered were never made public. But what mattered was this: the case wasn't as closed off as it seemed. At the same time, another line of information began to surface. A private investigator, Erica Morse, who had been working with Clint for years, started receiving messages. Women from across West Texas were coming forward. They described being harassed online by a man using a different name. But when Erica looked closer, she recognized something. The name he used, Casey, was familiar, but it was connected to Shaw Atkins. She asked for proof: photos, videos, messages. And after reviewing the material, one thing became clear. The person behind those accounts was him. It was new behavior, but it echoed something older, something investigators had already been concerned about. Erica took that information to law enforcement, accompanied one of the women to file a report, but instead of action, they were turned away. The report wasn't taken seriously. And the complaint was dismissed. That moment didn't end the effort. It changed it. Because after that, the case started to build pressure again, not just privately, but publicly. Erica spoke out, warned that if nothing was done, there could be more victims. Clint kept posting, kept pushing, kept reminding people that the case was still unresolved, and eventually, that pressure reached the people who had the ability to act. The case was reopened, re-examined, reviewed again from the beginning, but this time not as a fresh case, as a cold one. The Texas Rangers Cold Case Unit stepped in, a team specifically designed to look at cases that had stalled, to revisit evidence with a different perspective, to find what had been missed. Because sometimes the truth isn't hidden. It's just waiting for the right moment to be seen differently. Who knows, maybe after years of dead ends, something may finally change the direction of the investigation. For more than a decade, the case remained suspended in uncertainty. There were theories, there were suspicions, there was evidence that raised questions, but none of it had crossed the line into something prosecutors could use to make an arrest. Until 2021. By that point, the investigation had been handed to a different group, the Texas Rangers Cold Case Unit. Their role wasn't to start from scratch, it was to go back, re-examine everything, look at old evidence with fresh eyes, and ask a simple question: what was missed? Piece by piece, the case was rebuilt. Old timelines revisited, statements reconsidered, evidence reviewed again, not just for what it showed, but for what it might have meant. And then, a critical step. Investigators went to court and requested a warrant, not for an arrest, not yet, but for DNA. The request was approved. And for the first time in years, the case moved forward in a concrete way. On June 13th, 2021, that movement turned into action. Shaw Atkins was arrested and formally charged with the murder of Haley Dunn, more than 10 years after she disappeared. The news spread quickly. In Colorado City, the reaction was immediate: relief, emotion, a sense that something long overdue had finally happened. For years, the community had lived with unanswered questions. Now, at least, there was a movement toward accountability. For Haley's family, the moment was more complicated. There was no celebration, only a shift, from waiting to facing what came next. Billie Jean Dunn later said she wasn't surprised by the arrest. Over time, she had come to believe that Shaw was involved, even after everything that had happened before. And for Clint Dunn, the moment carried a different weight. Years of searching, years of pushing, years of refusing to let the case disappear. Now, finally, there was an arrest, but not yet an answer. Because despite everything that had led to this point, much of the evidence behind the arrest was not made public. Details remained sealed. The full explanation, the one that could connect every piece together, was still out of reach. The case moved into the legal system, where it would be tested, examined, challenged, and where, for the first time, the truth might be laid out in full. But even now, one thing remained the same. An arrest answers one question, but it opens another. What actually happened that day? And will the full truth finally come out into court? And will justice be served? So, when the arrest came in 2021, it felt like everything was finally moving forward. For a moment, it felt like the turning point. But it didn't last, because in June 2023, the charges were dropped, not because someone else was found, not because the case was solved, but because there wasn't enough evidence. The dismissal was without prejudice, meaning it could come back. But for now, Adkins walked free, and that's what makes this difficult. Suspicion was never the problem. From early on, his story didn't hold, the timeline didn't match, the data raised questions, investigators never moved away from him. But in court, that's not enough. There were no eyewitnesses, no DNA, no forensic evidence tying him directly to Haley's death. Even the timeline worked against the case, and cell data suggested he had only a short window, around 2 hours alone with her. And within that time, prosecutors would have to prove everything: the crime, the cleanup, the concealment. Without physical evidence, that becomes almost impossible. There was potential evidence. Soil on his boots matched the area where Haley was found, but the testing method wasn't accepted in court, and just like that, another piece fell away. So in 2023, prosecutors made a decision not to close the case, but to step back, to avoid losing it completely, to keep the option open if stronger evidence is found. But outside the courtroom, that didn't feel like strategy. It felt like something was lost. For Haley's family, for those who followed the case, it felt like the closest moment to justice slipped away. Some called it caution, so others called it something else, a failure. And now the case sits in between. There is a suspect, but no conviction. There was an arrest, but no trial. There is a belief about what happened, but nothing that can prove it in court. And so, after all this time, the question remains the same. What really happened that day? Because until that answer can be proven, not assumed, not believed, but proven, this case isn't closed. It's just unfinished. What do you think happened? Who do you suspect? Share your opinion in the comments. Also, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't.